The year was approximately 850 BCE. The famine had lasted 3 years. 3 years without adequate rain in a region where adequate rain was already a gift rather than a guarantee. 3 years of harvest failure, of livestock dying in the field, of the price of grain at the market climbing past what working families could pay. The prophet Elisha was at Gilgal. His students, a community of prophets who lived together, studied together, ate together, were starving alongside everyone else. And Elisha said 3 words: "Put on the pot." What went into that pot is recorded in 2 Kings chapter 4. Wild gourds gathered from a field, whatever grain they had, a broth, a stew that was, by any nutritional standard, an emergency food. A way to extract maximum sustenance from minimum ingredients and feed a community that had almost nothing. What is not recorded, what Scripture didn't need to say, because everyone reading it already knew, was how old that recipe was. The soup that saved the school of prophets in Gilgal was part of a tradition of communal survival cooking that went back to the Exodus, to the wilderness, to the first generation of Israelites who had to feed themselves from a landscape that didn't want to be eaten. And that tradition contained nutritional knowledge so sophisticated that it was not simply feeding people. It was keeping them alive when everything else said they should have died. We stopped making it, and we paid a price we didn't even notice. Famine food is a specific category in human nutritional history. It is the food you make when you have almost nothing, when the good ingredients are gone, when the stores are empty, when what remains is the edge cases of the larder. And counterintuitively, across multiple cultures and multiple millennia, famine food has often turned out to be more nutritionally sophisticated than the everyday food it replaced. The reason is that famine forces creativity with ingredients that were previously overlooked. Greens that were too bitter to eat in abundance became the only greens available. Legumes that were considered coarse peasant food became the center of the diet. Wild plants that were used as flavoring became the primary ingredient. The soup that runs through biblical literature from the time of Jacob to the time of the early church is a legume-based, herb-enriched, slow-cooked pot food that modern nutritional science would classify as one of the most complete single-dish meals a human being can eat. Let me be specific about what was in it. Lentils, specifically red lentils, the lentils of the ancient Levant, were the primary protein source. A single cup of cooked lentils contains 18 grams of protein, 90% of your daily folate requirement, 37% of your daily iron requirement, and an extraordinary 23 grams of dietary fiber. The soup that Jacob made, the pottage that Esau sold his birthright for in Genesis 25, was lentil soup. Red lentil soup specifically, based on the Hebrew word Edom, red, used to describe it. Esau was not being foolish when he sold his birthright for a bowl of it. He was exhausted, he was hungry, and what Jacob had cooked was the most nutritionally dense hot food available in that landscape. And it gets more complex than lentils. The base of the biblical soup was lentils, or a mixture of legumes, lentils, chickpeas, fava beans. But the flavoring ingredients were not casual additions. They were, by any functional medicine analysis, a pharmacopoeia. Cumin, mentioned throughout the Old Testament as a cooking spice. Modern research has established cumin as a digestive aid that reduces bloating and gas, the primary side effects of eating large quantities of legumes. The ancient cooks who added cumin to their lentil soup were solving a digestive problem with a plant-based solution that we now confirm with clinical data. Garlic, ubiquitous in ancient Levantine cooking. Numbers 11:5 records the Israelites in the wilderness, specifically lamenting the garlic of Egypt. It was not a seasoning, it was a staple. Modern research confirms Elisha, garlic's active compound, as a potent antimicrobial agent. In a world without antibiotics, garlic-enriched food was a survival tool. Onion, present in every archaeological record of ancient Levantine food. Quercetin, onion's primary bioactive compound, is now classified as an anti-inflammatory flavonoid. In a population under chronic physiological stress from famine, heavy labor, and endemic infection, anti-inflammatory food was not a lifestyle choice. It was medicine. Bitter herbs. The wild plants gathered from the fields during Passover were not symbolic. They were nutritionally functional. Wild chicory, dandelion greens, and sorrel are extraordinarily dense in vitamins A and K. They are bitter because they contain compounds that stimulate bile production and support liver function. The ancient Israelites ate bitter herbs not because they enjoyed the taste, but because their bodies recognized what the taste signaled. Put all of these together in a slow-simmered pot, and what you have is not a simple famine food. You have a gut-supporting, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, protein-rich, mineral-dense survival meal that was engineered, not by nutritionists with degrees, but by 3,000 years of accumulated human trial and error. To sustain a population through conditions that should have broken it. The cooking method matters as much as the ingredients. And this is where the biblical soup tradition becomes even more remarkable. Ancient pots were thick-walled clay vessels that conducted heat slowly and retained it long after the fire was reduced. Modern tests on replica ancient clay pots have shown that they maintain a near constant temperature once heated, between 85 and 95 degrees Celsius, without reaching the boiling point that destroys heat-sensitive nutrients. This matters because the optimal cooking temperature for legumes, the temperature at which they become digestible and their anti-nutrients are deactivated without destroying their vitamins, is exactly that range. Below a rolling boil, long and slow. The biblical soup was cooked slowly, by design, not because the cooks chose slow cooking as a technique, but because their equipment produced slow cooking naturally. The clay pot on a low fire, the embers banked against the side, the hours of simmering while the household went about its work. During that long cook, something critical happened to the legumes. The lectins, compounds in raw legumes that cause digestive distress and, in high enough concentrations, genuine toxicity, were deactivated by the combination of soaking and slow heat. The legumes had almost always been soaked overnight before cooking. This soaking, followed by long, slow cooking, produced a fully safe and highly digestible protein source. And the broth. Every ancient recipe that involves slow-cooked legumes produces a broth that is extraordinarily rich in minerals leached from the legumes themselves, from any bones or aromatics in the pot, and from the clay vessel. A broth that was drunk as well as eaten. That was given to the sick and the elderly and the nursing mothers, because the community understood empirically that it was medicine. The broth in Elisha's pot was the same broth. Simple, slow, dense with the accumulated minerals of hours of simmering. Let me take you to a specific place. The hill villages of Galilee in the 1st century, BCE. Communities of 200 to 500 people, living at altitude in the limestone hills above the Sea of Galilee. Farming terraced land that was productive in good years and marginal in bad ones. Archaeological excavation of storage facilities at these sites, the granaries, the oil presses, the cisterns, reveals the dietary reality of the lean months. From approximately February to the new harvest in April or May, the granary was nearly empty. The olive oil from the autumn pressing was running low. The dried legumes from the previous harvest were the primary food source. The villages survived, not all of them, every year. There are archaeological markers of acute starvation at some sites in some periods. But the baseline, the nutritional infrastructure that allowed the population to persist through cycle after cycle of lean months and bad years, was the legume-based soup tradition. The women knew how to stretch it. 1 cup of dried lentils, when properly soaked, cooked slowly, and combined with wild greens gathered from the hillside, could feed a family of 5 as a complete meal. 2 cups could feed 8. The math of stretching dried legumes through communal cooking, cooking in a single pot and sharing it, was the economic foundation of village survival. This is not poverty food in the pejorative sense. This is survival engineering. This is the food science of people who had been doing it for 1,000 years and had, through selection and practice, arrived at the most efficient possible approach to feeding a community from limited resources. And it produced healthy people. The skeletal evidence from these Galilean hill sites shows that the populations were well nourished by the standards of the ancient world. Strong bones, adequate height for the era. Markers of chronic nutritional deficiency present but not dominant. On lentil soup and wild greens, here is the recipe. Not adapted, not modernized. The actual preparation method documented across multiple archaeological and textual sources from ancient Israel. Red lentils, 1 to 2 cups depending on the number of people. Place in a clay vessel or heavy pot with 2 to 3 times their volume of water. Soak overnight. This is not optional in the original method. The soaking begins the fermentation process, reduces lectins, and dramatically improves digestibility and mineral bioavailability. The next morning, drain and cover again with fresh water. Bring to a low simmer, not a boil. This is important. A rolling boil destroys heat-sensitive vitamins and creates a protein foam that the ancient cooks scooped off. But avoiding the boil entirely preserves more nutrition. Aromatics added early in the cooking, garlic, whole cloves, not minced, onion, quartered, cumin seeds, toasted briefly in a dry pan first to release the oils. These aromatics should enter the pot when it is still cold, so their compounds extract into the broth over the full cooking time, not just the last 20 minutes. Wild or bitter greens, if available, added in the final 30 minutes of cooking. Dandelion leaves, chicory, spinach, or any dark leafy green. These wilt quickly, and their vitamins are preserved in the broth. Salt added at the end, not the beginning. This is consistent with ancient practice and also with modern culinary science. Salt added early toughens legumes and extends cooking time significantly. Cooking time, 2 to 3 hours at a low simmer. The lentils should break down completely into a thick, unified stew. This is not lentil soup with whole lentils visible. This is a pottage, a thick, cohesive mass of concentrated nutrition. Finish with olive oil drizzled on top, always, in every ancient preparation. The fat increases the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins from the greens, vitamins A and K specifically, and provides the caloric density that makes the meal satiating. This is Esau's soup. This is the school of prophets' soup. This is the soup of every Galilean village through every lean winter for 3,000 years. We stopped making it for the same reason we stopped making fermented bread. Convenience. Industrial food production in the 20th century solved the problem of feeding a growing urban population by producing cheap, fast, shelf-stable food. Canned beans replaced soaked dried legumes. Refined carbohydrates replaced slow-cooked pottages. The soup pot that sat on every hearth for hours every day was replaced by a can opener, and the nutritional loss was real and measurable. Canned lentils have a fraction of the prebiotic fiber content of properly soaked and slow-cooked lentils because the canning process at high temperature destroys resistant starch. Canned vegetables have lost between 20 and 40% of their heat-sensitive vitamins before you open the can. The broth produced by slow-cooking legumes, that mineral-dense, gut-nourishing liquid that ancient households drank as medicine, is not in the can. And we lost something else. Something that nutrition science does not yet have a full vocabulary for. We lost the practice of communal cooking. The biblical soup tradition was not just a recipe. It was a social technology. The pot went on in the morning, and it fed whoever came. In Elisha's school of prophets, it fed a community. In the hill villages of Galilee, it fed extended family networks. The shared pot was the shared table, and the shared table was the social glue of communities that needed each other to survive. We replaced it with individual portions from individual cans consumed in individual rooms. The cost of that substitution is not only nutritional, it is social. It is relational. It is the quiet dissolution of the communal meal that was, for 3,000 years, the center of human social life. The famine that hit Gilgal in the time of Elisha did not destroy the school of prophets. They put on the pot. They gathered what they had. They cooked it slowly, and they ate together. That act, simple, practical, ancient, was not merely about survival. It was about a community that had a tradition of knowing how to feed itself when everything else failed. The tradition was more valuable than the food itself, because a community that knows how to feed itself through famine is a community that cannot be broken by famine. The knowledge is the resilience. The practice is the strength. The pot that goes on every morning is the daily act of a culture that takes its survival seriously enough to invest time, attention, and accumulated wisdom into the food that sustains it. We have outsourced that knowledge. We have traded the practice for the convenience. And the statistics tell us, in numbers that should be alarming, what the trade cost. 80% of American adults do not meet the daily fiber recommendation. Fiber that, for 3,000 years, came naturally from a diet centered on legumes and whole grains prepared by traditional methods. The gut microbiome, the community of bacteria that regulates immunity, mood, metabolism, and inflammation, requires dietary fiber to survive. Without it, the microbiome collapses. And the microbiome collapse is written in every autoimmune disease chart, every anxiety and depression study, every metabolic disease statistic of the modern era. The soup in Elisha's pot was not primitive nutrition. It was sophisticated nutrition that we were sophisticated enough, briefly, to abandon, and maybe just wise enough to recover. Soak your lentils tonight. Put them on tomorrow morning with garlic and onion and cumin. Let them cook slowly for 2 hours. Add whatever greens you have. Finish with olive oil. Eat it from a bowl with good bread. Share it with someone at your table. That is not a recipe. That is 3,000 years of human wisdom returning to a kitchen where it belongs. If this changed how you think about the food of Scripture, share it tonight. Subscribe for more of the knowledge that history almost let go. Tell me in the comments. Have you made lentil soup from scratch? Do you know what a pottage is? Drop it below. I'll see you in the next one.